Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 8, The Wonderful World of Puberty. Um, so I invite you to take a trip down memory lane and remember what it was like to hit puberty and to go through puberty. This chapter in your textbook is really looking at the whole idea of adolescence, early adolescence, and the onset of and development of puberty. In two senses. One is the physical sense, which leads to the psychological development, and also we're coming at the psychological aspects of development in terms of moral reasoning. This is essential because probably one of the biggest deals of adolescence that people have frustration with adolescence involves decision making. So we're going to talk a lot about the physical development in this chapter. We'll read about and look at the physical development, and then we're going to see how does that affect the development of the brain and how does that affect our psychological makeup, emotional regulation, choices we make, all of that. These are big questions. First of all, we got to think about what happens when you hit puberty. So up to this point in physical development, we're kids, little kids. Here we are, tooling around, going to school, learning stuff. Probably the most important thing you're learning is what are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you need to work hard on? And then one day, plopped in the middle of this time where we're really starting to understand other people and what do other people think. If you remember, that's sort of where we left off chapter 7. What do other people think about us? Then one day you wake up. I don't know if it's really about one moment, but you start to develop in areas that you weren't developing in. Things change and you get more hair in certain places and more fat in other places, and here you're looking around and you're different from other people and you're becoming someone new almost. And how do we handle that? What does that mean? So one of the big questions as we see this physical pubertal development is, are we prepared? To what degree are we really prepared to change? If you remember way back there when we were talking a couple of chapters ago about being born, and I made the point that you're born when you decide when to be born. Really, that first hormonal response that leads to the mom going into labor, comes from the baby. Same thing when you hit puberty. It comes from your genetics. There is a moment that you're supposed to hit puberty. It is already programmed when you're born into your genes, and there it comes. Probably largely dependent on genes, like I just said. So moms who reach puberty early usually have daughters who reach puberty earlier. Fathers who reach puberty early have sons that reach puberty early. You notice I'm talking gender there. So there are of course other influences. A lot of people kind of throw it down to the hormones in our food. That's not really the whole story. There is a psychological effect, as you're going to see in the chapter. There's a psychological effect. So the very fact that a lot of children grow up in households where they do not have two parents, that contributes to earlier onset of puberty right there, because children are now raised in households interacting with people who are not genetically related. Do you know that you have the ability through your smelling sense to tell whether somebody is genetically related to you? Now, you may not know it up here, but you know it here olfactorily. And for that reason, that can kick you into puberty, because then you can become sexually active and transmit your genes and all that. Now, you could say, well, child's 8 years old, my God, we don't want that. But yeah, you're we're talking about evolutionary psychology. You do. Uh, Children who grow up in households where there's a lot of stress, children who grow up in households where there is a lot of like people yelling and screaming, all of those are going to psychologically contribute to your body wanting to reach puberty earlier. And think about why. Maybe next week I'll tell you if I remember. Anyway, there are a lot of factors in our society that contribute to the earlier onset of puberty. A big question to ask is, what does that matter? Is it okay? Well, it has to be okay. That's just the way it is. But is it okay? What does it matter if you reach puberty earlier? Now we're finding in a lot of medical research that people who reach puberty earlier are less healthy. In women especially, it contributes to the earlier onset of menopause, of course, but it also contributes to more cancers and breast cancer and stuff like that, possibly. Psychologically, it could affect me if you're just a child who's really not mature enough to handle the fact that now people are looking at you as let's just say a sex object, maybe, or that people are thinking about sex when they look at you or something, and you're a little kid, you may not in your mind be able to handle that people are thinking of you differently, and that can be something that is difficult for children to deal with. They may not really be ready to look at each other and be able to handle those choices of how to deal with that. Things like boyfriend, girlfriend, dating, touching, kissing, all of that. I mean, I've had some interesting talks with young people, young adolescents, late children about how do they look at each other, and if they don't have an upbringing where they have learned to value one another as people, then they value one another as the objects of lust, sex. Hey, you're in my class, and I'm going to keep it real, and that's really the way it is. You know it, I know it. So if that makes you uncomfortable, I'm very sorry. I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, but I tell you one thing, I'm not going to pretty something up and make it what it's not. I'm going to tell you the truth. And I think you should think about it truthfully as well. So the next question then is, since we're talking about mentally being prepared for making these decisions, is why is it that adolescents kind of seem to struggle with decision making? I will tell you that the adolescent brain is almost the same as an adult brain. What is still under construction is sort of that bridge between emotional thinking, which is important, and reasoning, rational thinking, which is important as well. And so it's not that we're dumb or stupid in adolescence, because we're not. We're quite intelligent. It's just that we don't always think in the best way, and sometimes we make decisions based on how we feel at the moment when that's not really well thought out. And so there's a good amount of this chapter that you're going to read about young adolescents and decision making, and how this is a time of their lives when they really are starting to look at making decisions not necessarily just based on whether or not they're going to get in trouble, which we would call pre-conventional moral reasoning, but they're thinking about conventional moral reasoning, which is where we take into account what other people think, or what most people are doing, or what the rules are in terms of why are there rules? Well, they're rules because we live with other people, and so we can't always have things our way. And hopefully we start to reason, or we're encouraged to reason on a post-conventional level, which is where we would see that our real moral responsibility goes beyond what is allowed or not allowed, or whether you're going to get in trouble or not. Because as adults, we know that something may be the wrong thing to do, and nobody sees and nobody punishes you, but you know it's the right or the wrong thing to do. This is coming back to the question I gave you last week about people and valuing other people. Is it wrong to gun down a bunch of people at school? Well, if you've ever lost a friend like that, hell yeah, it is. Excuse my French. If you have, lost a friend, you know the value of them. The people. Each person has that inherent value. And because of that, sometimes the rules that are given to us, the laws out there, don't necessarily cover that social contract there. And that leads us to a post-conventional view. So anyway, that's my quick explanation of moral reasoning, and this is one of the big questions of adolescence, is learning to think about things and consider all of the input. Anyway, man, I give you some heavy thinking. I like to be funny. I like to think of the light stuff. But in adolescence, yeah, I love adolescents. I love being an adolescent. I love working with adolescents because they're good, deep thinking people. Really, really, really cool. So, again, let me invite you to take a trip down memory lane. Remember what it was like to be a teenager. I hope you all have a great week. Take care of yourselves. And I'll see you for Chapter 9.